This is an overview of data encryption, primarily private key encryption. Public key encryption will be covered in a following lecture. The general concept of encryption, as you take plain text, and plain text can be any bunch of bytes. It's text, programs, graphics, documents, whatever. It's HTML, whatever you want, and then it feeds into an encryption algorithm along with a key. And out comes ciphertext. Now, ciphertext looks like a random bunch of bits. Really provides no information to anyone who reads it. And then that ciphertext goes into a decryption algorithm with the appropriate key, and out comes the plain text, which should be identical to the plain text that went in the first time. People have been using encryption for thousands of years. The Caesar cipher, which is just a shift cipher, very simple, said to have been used by Julius Caesar. Before we had computers, computational efficiency was very important in a cipher. We couldn't do the type of ciphers we have now with computers because it would just take too long to do it by hand. Encryption is basically the same whether you are encrypting data to be sent over a network or encrypting data that you'll store in a computer and then look at again later on. One of the most secure encryption systems is the one-time pad. The one-time pad takes a stream of random bits, truly random, not just pseudo-random, and exclusively ORs them with the data. As long as the random bit stream is as long as the data is, then your message will be encrypted and the exclusive OR will look completely random. It is a perfect encryption scheme, perfect in the sense that given a ciphertext, you can come up with any resulting plain text that you want if you give it the right key. So an attacker will never know whether they got the right key or not because you can use any key you want and get the appropriate response. Similar to the one-time pad is the running key cipher. The running key cipher is a similar concept, but instead of mixing the text with a stream of random bits, you mix it with information from usually some periodical. This is used in the movies and such frequently, where there's a secret book and then nobody knows except for the spies. And then it's usually preceded by a page and chapter number. And then they take the appropriate chapter and get that series of characters. And in this case, they're adding the character values to the plain text, or you can do exclusive or whatever you have. And that produces ciphertext. It's not quite as good as the one-time pad because the one-time pad is truly random and you can't make anything out of it. Turns out that human text is far from random. It's very predictable, and so the key can be figured out quite easily, particularly if you happen to know part of it. If you know what part of the plain text is, a part of the key, you can exclusive OR it along the string and look for readable strings. And there you have part of it. After that, it's easier. In general, an encryption algorithm should use two different means of providing encryption. One is diffusion, that is, spread the data across many ciphertext bytes. With the DES and AES algorithms, if you change just one bit of the plain text, then it will change about half the bits of the ciphertext. So it makes a big impact. The data is diffused across a wide range of the ciphertext. This is opposed to a byte by byte or character by character encryption system. The second part of encryption algorithm should be confusion. That is, shuffle the bits, change the bits a bit so that the attacker doesn't know what you've got. There are two basic categories of encryption systems. There's symmetric key or secret key encryption. They're both the same. In this type of encryption, the encryption key is the same as the decryption key. So the sender and the receiver have to both have the same key, and somehow the sender has to get the key securely to the receiver. There's many ways to do this. The SSL protocol transmits it using another encryption system. Or if you have real secret stuff, you can have the Marine Guard take it to the embassy. Another encryption system is asymmetric key or public key encryption. With public key encryption, the key to decrypt is different than the key to encrypt. The keys are related mathematically, but they are different, and their mathematical relationship is one that's very hard to reverse. That way, you can have a public key, one that everybody can know, and then a secret key that only one person should know. For symmetric key, which is no stronger or less strong than public key, you have the same keys on either side. Here's an example where the key is used to encrypt the plain text into ciphertext. You send the ciphertext across the network, and the other side then runs it through a decryption algorithm with the very same key. The DES, or Data Encryption Standard, and AES, the Advanced Encryption Standard, are examples of symmetric key encryption algorithms. Now, some people wonder, why should we have standard encryption algorithms? Why do we use these well-known algorithms that everybody knows? Why not use a secret algorithm? Well, the purpose is that if you're going to send information to somebody else and have it encrypted, the other people have to know how to decrypt it, so they have to know the algorithm. Also, a good encryption algorithm uses the key to keep it secret. If you don't know the key, you can't decrypt it. Only knowing the key is what you have to have. Knowing the algorithm doesn't give you access. You have to have the key. Also, the standards have been examined very carefully by cryptanalysis, and people feel that they are secure. Don't try to create your own encryption algorithm. Learn to use the existing algorithms effectively. You think you're better than the experts? Many of the popular secret key algorithms use a substitution permutation cipher. This involves three basic steps that are shuffled around. You have a substitution, or they substitute one pattern of bits with another, or permutation, or they rearrange the order of the bits, and then the exclusive order of the values with a key. The DES and AES algorithms are both forms of a substitution permutation cipher. This is a simple textbook example of a substitution permutation cipher. In this system, you can imagine the data coming in. We have 16 bits of data coming in and 16 bits of ciphertext going out. In the first step, they exclusive OR the data with the key. And then the data goes into substitution boxes, which substitutes the value. So you have 4-bit value going in, and you have a different 4-bit value coming out. Each of the substitution boxes are different. And then after the substitution boxes, you have a diffusion. The bits go into different positions on the key. In other words, you can see the bits from substitution box 1, instead of going directly to the first 4 bits of the next stage, go to different bits. And each of the substitution boxes have their outputs going to different inputs of the next stage. And this repeats, in this case, through 4 stages. And then at the out, we exclusive OR again with the key, and you have the output. In this case, each of the keys are slightly different. They're modified from the original key, so that when you exclusive OR them, you exclusive OR them with a different value at each stage. The S boxes perform a substitution. It's a relatively simple concept. If you look at the table we have here, there's the input values, and we have all 8 possible combinations of 3 bits. And below it are the outputs, and you can see different combinations give different combinations of output, with no particular pattern. So if the 3 input bits are 0, 0, 0, then the output bits are 1, 0, 1. But it's different for every possible combination. The input and outputs do not have to be the same length. Sometimes you have an expansion substitution box where the number of bits in the output is larger than the number of bits in the input. And in this case, we have a contraction where the number of bits on the output are smaller than the number of bits in the input. You'll notice, of course, because of this, there are multiple input values that give the same output value. An input value of 0, 0, 0 gives a 1, 0 output, as does an input value of 1, 1, 0. A permutation rearranges the bits. And again, the number of output bits does not have to match the number of input bits. In this example, we have 6 input bits rearranged to form 8 output bits. And again, at each stage, we are exclusive ORing the value with the key, but instead of using the original key, the key is modified by an algorithm so that you're exclusive ORing it with a different value at every stage. The data encryption standard, which has been around since 1977, is a substitution permutation algorithm. It was developed way back by IBM, and it uses a relatively short key, a 56-bit key. It encrypts 64-bit blocks of data, so 64-bit values of plain text go in and 64-bit blocks of ciphertext come out. Since it's been around for a long time, it is very widely used, although not as secure as we'd like. In the DES algorithm, it being a substitution permutation cipher, there are 16 stages, so 16 times that it rearranges things. It does it left and right halves. There are splits the 64 bits into a 32-bit left and a 32-bit right. And then the 56-bit key is expanded and produce two 28-bit values. And they are used to exclusive OR it with it. Here's an example of the bit pattern. Okay, we have a 64-bit value going in, the right and the left side. The right side goes into an expansion box and becomes a 48-bit output. You then exclusive OR that with a function of the key. That gives you 48 more bits that go through a contraction substitution boxes. So you have 48 bits in, 32 bits out. You then rearrange those. You have 32 more bits. And then you exclusive OR that 32-bit value with the 32 bits that were the left side of the input. And that produces the right side of the 32 bits. The left side of the output is simply the 32 bits from the right side. And then you repeat it so the right and left stuff shuffle back and forth. There's no good reason for a computer science student to have to know the details of an encryption algorithm's implementation. It is very important that a computer science student know how to select and use the appropriate encryption system. It has been found over the decades that DES has a few weaknesses. One of the biggest issues is that the key is too short. Computers become much faster over the many years since the algorithm has been invented, and so brute forcing it is very possible. Also, cryptanalysis has shown that instead of using the full 56-bit keys, with the proper chosen 47-bit keys, you can determine what the key is supposed to be. So let's think, if we need 2 to the 47 possible keys, how long will it take to figure that out? Well, if we can try 1 million keys a second, I just made that number up because it's a nice round number, but we can try 1 million keys a second, one key every microsecond. And since the computer executes instructions in nanoseconds, that's not unreasonable. So how long will it take to try 247 keys? Well, 247 keys can be represented as 1.4 times 10 to the 14, so we can look at it in base 10. And then You divide that by 1,000,000 keys per second, and you end up with 1.4 times 10 to the 8th seconds. Computing that into years, in other words, dividing it by 60 seconds per minute, 60 minutes per hour, 24 hours per day, and 365 days per year, you end up with 4.46 years. So with a moderately priced computer, you could defeat a DES algorithm in 4.46 years, which may seem like a long time. But imagine you were going to do it with a supercomputer. Using one of the faster supercomputers, you can do this in less than a minute. Because DES is not particularly secure, but very popular and available, what most people use is what they call triple DES. They use the DES algorithm 3 times. In fact, they start by encrypting the data with one key. Then they take the result of that and they run through the decryption algorithm with a second key, and then take the result of that and they encrypt that with a third key. So you encrypt, decrypt, encrypt using different keys. Now you can use 3 separate 56-bit keys, or it works very well if the first key and the third key are the same. So you encrypt with one key, decrypt with the second key, and then encrypt with the first key again. Recognizing the problems with DES, about 20 years ago, they had a competition to find an improved algorithm. And they selected the Reindahl algorithm, which is now known as AES, or the Advanced Encryption Standard. It's similar to DES, but with several enhancements that make it easier to implement and much more secure. The keys are also larger. You can use either 128-bit keys, 194-bit keys, or 256-bit keys. AES also encrypts blocks of 128 bits instead of 64 bits like DES does. Depending on the number of bits in the key depends on the number of rounds. So if you're using only 128-bit keys, it does 10 rounds as the substitution permutation algorithm. If you're using 192-bit keys, it does 12 rounds, and 14 rounds if you're using the 256-bit keys. So if you're really concerned about security, you use the long keys, and it will do lots of rounds, scrambling it up more and more. So far, nobody's published a method that will defeat AES. You can always defeat it by brute force, but trying 2 to the 256 keys takes a long time. Somebody did find that they could probably reduce the number of key attempts to only a quarter of the number of keys. It makes it run 4 times faster than brute force. When Snowden released a whole pile of documents several years ago, he claimed that the NSA is looking into techniques to defeat the AES algorithm. Okay. If you have to try 2 to the 256 keys, but we can cut that down to 1/4. Well, how big is that? A, B, C, or D? Think about it. The answer is to take 2 to the 256 and divide it by 4, which is 2 to the 2. That can be calculated by 2 to the 256 minus 2, or 2 to the 254. That gives you a number of 1.6 times 10 to the 76. That's still a really big number. No computer available today can brute force that many possible values in your lifetime. But what if you brute force it with a quantum computer? While the RSA algorithm is said to be vulnerable to quantum computers, AES is said to be quantum proof. Besides, you ain't ever going to see a quantum computer in your lifetime.